everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my November reading wrap-up. You're probably wondering why I'm dressed like this. To be fair, this isn't that far off to how I usually look, but I was filming some Wednesday-related TikToks, so I thought I may as well just film this video while I'm all done up. So yes, that is why I look like this. But in November, I actually read 8 books, which is the most that I have read in a month so far this year. So I'm really pleased about that. I'm also so happy to say that after being 7 books behind schedule on my Goodreads reading challenge for the majority of the year, I have finally caught up and I am now on track. So I had to read quite a few graphic novels and or short stories in order to catch up with my challenge because I was so far behind. So I read 4 regular novels, one of which being a short story, and then I read 4 graphic novels, which I will talk about towards the end of this video to kind of help me catch up with my reading challenge. I needed some easier things to get through, but nonetheless, it all counts as books. So let's just get started with the books that I read in November, starting off with the regular novels that I read. So first up, we have the audiobook that I listened to, which was the book of Phobias and Manias, A History of Obsession by Kate Summerscale. So this is a nonfiction book. I prefer to read nonfiction in audiobook form, and I did really enjoy the audiobook for this. This is kind of a book that I had a love-hate relationship with because on one hand, I found it to be really interesting, like phobias and manias, the history of it, you know, certain direct stories of people that have dealt with these kinds of things. It was really interesting to learn about. On the flip side, some of these are things that I do have phobias of, so reading about them was a little bit icky to read about, and I'm also kind of like a hypochondriac, and I kind of tend to, you know, read into things a little bit too much. So sometimes while reading this book, I was like, oh my gosh, do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this? Which, you know, if you're anything like me, then you might want to just be careful picking this kind of book up. But overall, I found it to be pretty interesting. So I think I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I also read The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. I had to return this back to the library, so I only have a picture to show you. But this was the collection of novellas that goes along with the Throne of Glass series. I had just read up to the part of the series where everybody recommends picking up this book. Even though this is a prequel to the entire series, there's like a certain point in the series that you have to read it in order to not be spoiled for things that happen in the later books, if that makes sense. So I finally read this, and I have to say, I loved this. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I think this actually might be my favorite Throne of Glass book. So far, I haven't read all of them yet, but so far I think this is my favorite one. I just loved seeing how Selena got to the point that she is at now. Like, this really does a good job of showing you how she became the assassin that she is in the book series now. And this was like both a fun time to read, but at the same time, incredibly heartbreaking at times. Like, it has a big moment in this book, and I have to say I really loved the relationship in this story, which makes all of it that much more painful. But yes, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. It made me feel all of the emotions, and I just loved it. I loved what she did with the characters in this book and how she showed how they became the characters that they are today. So yes, I would totally recommend this book if you're reading the Throne of Glass series. I know some people don't always read the novellas that go along with series, but this is one that you should have to pick up. Next up, we have a reread, which was also the short story that I read, and that is The Grown Up by Gillian Flynn. So I had read this back in 2019, I think, something around that time, and I really enjoyed this when I read it. Obviously, it's a very short story, so I don't want to tell you anything about what it's about because that would just be a spoiler, but it's kind of a ghost story, psychological thriller. So I remember reading it and being really like confused and, you know, bewildered by the ending, but really enjoying it. Like, that's how the ending is supposed to leave you. But then a couple years later, we are in the present, and I was at the library and I happened to see this book on the shelf, and I remembered being bewildered by the ending, but not at all remembering what the ending was. So I was like, I need to give that a reread, and I did. And now I remember why this book is as trippy as it is. But yes, this is like a 4-star read for me. Again, after the reread, I still would recommend it. It definitely is an adult book for a short story. This packs quite a lot of adult content into it, so be wary of that before you pick this book up, but I would recommend it if you want something just like short and spooky and psychological to read. And then the final novel that I have to talk about that isn't a graphic novel is Disappearing Act by Robert Sheehan. So this book was featured, I know, in my 22 books I want to read in 2022 video, and I had said in that video how excited I was to read this because I'm a huge fan of Robert Sheehan as an actor and just as a person in general. Like, if you've ever seen any of his interviews, you know that he's just absolutely hilarious and just such a charming person. So I was so excited to read this book. It is a collection of 16 short stories. I couldn't even tell you, I guess they're contemporary. Just wait. There's 16 short stories, so I kind of was weary going into it because I'm notoriously known to not enjoy short story collections except when they're of like the thriller or horror genre, so I was nervous going into this, and I am so sad to say that I gave this book 1 out of 5 stars. This was just too weird for me. I knew that this book was going to be weird, but I was hoping it would be a good kind of weird, which would then help me to enjoy short stories, which I don't normally like. So I was hoping that that's what was going to happen, but this book just felt like a fever dream that I just wanted to wake up from. Like, it was so bizarre that I couldn't follow most of the stories that were happening. Like, I think the only story that I was sort of intrigued by and I could sort of follow what was happening was a story that is told from the perspective of like the creepy guy that drives the creepy van and preys on children. Like, that was the only story in here that I could kind of follow. Besides that, couldn't tell you what any of this was about. Like, even if I tried, I couldn't tell you. This book is also very much written in a way where, so Robert Sheehan is Irish, if you didn't know. It's very much written in the Irish accent, if that makes sense. So I really tried to read it as if he was reading it to me, and I tried to picture his accent in my head, so that way, like, the grammar and the word choices and everything makes sense. But if you tried to read this in just like a typical American accent, the grammar and like the way that the sentences are structured just wouldn't make sense. I hope that what I'm saying is making sense when I say that this is written in an Irish accent, but that's the only way that I can describe it, where like if you were reading it in just an American accent, it just wouldn't sound right at all. So yes, I'm so upset that this book didn't work out because it's also such a beautiful book, so it's really left me torn as to what I want to do with this. If I want to hold on to this book and just keep it in my collection because I love Robert Sheehan and because the cover of this book is so beautiful, or if I want to pass it along to somebody else who maybe will enjoy it more than I would. I know that there is an audience out there for this book because it is weird, but I know it's somebody's weird, just not mine. So I know that there's an audience out there for this book, but it wasn't me. So yes, those were all of the actual novels that I read in November. Now let's move on to the graphic novels. So all of the graphic novels that I read in November were actually Star Wars graphic novels, so I'm going to go in the order that I read them in. So first up we have Age of Republic Heroes. So this is basically like a little compilation. It's not one completed story in this book. It's made up of, I think, 4 or 5 just like short little comics, each one following a different hero of the Age of Republic. So I did enjoy this because these are like some of my favorite characters come from the prequel trilogy. Anakin is of course my favorite, and I love Obi-Wan. I don't think I've ever actually read a graphic novel that heavily featured Qui-Gon Jinn or Padme, so I really enjoyed reading their stories in here as well. So overall, I think I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, or maybe like a 3.5. I enjoyed it, but I definitely do prefer the graphic novels where it's like one whole completed story. The second one that I picked up is called Hope Dies. This, as you can see, has a beautiful image of Princess Leia on the cover, and this comic or graphic novel primarily does focus on Princess Leia's character, and I absolutely loved this. I think I'd have to give this a 5 out of 5 star rating. This takes place, I believe, between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, it primarily focuses on Princess Leia's character, but we also do get a lot of Han Solo and Chewbacca, who are also two of my favorite characters. But one of the things that I loved the most about this is that the artwork is just stunning. I feel like they captured Carrie Fisher's face so accurately in this artwork. Like, I've never seen it look so like realistic to me. So I just really loved everything about this. I loved the story, I loved the artwork, I obviously loved the characters that it focused on. I mean, that's not surprising to anybody, but yeah, I just can't get over how good the artwork was in this one in particular. So this was a 5 out of 5 stars, and I would totally recommend this if you're looking to pick up any of the Star Wars graphic novels. Next, I read Shattered Empire. This one takes place after the events of Return of the Jedi. I think I gave this like a 3 out of 5 stars. This one was a little bit forgettable for me. Like, I'm already struggling to recall what this was even about, and it did follow some of my favorite characters, but we also had a large following of a character that I wasn't familiar with who isn't a part of the movies, and I tend to kind of lose interest when it doesn't follow like the main characters that I love. So yeah, this one was a little bit forgettable for me, and I also didn't like the artwork in this one as much as some of the other ones, so this was only a 3-star for me. And then the final graphic novel I read in November was Darth Vader: The Burning Seas. This one, I believe, takes place after the events of the Revenge of the Sith. I am not 100% sure about that though, but this pretty much follows just Darth Vader. Like, there are a couple other characters, like very much minor characters from the movies that will appear in this book, but as far as like the main characters of the movies, the only one in here is Darth Vader and like Tarkin, if you consider him to be a main character. But I did enjoy this one. I'd say I'd give this like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really love Darth Vader, so I loved seeing his character progression in this book and the things that he does. However, it also did heavily focus on Tarkin, who's one of my least favorite characters, so that was a little bit annoying. And yeah, this just wasn't like my favorite graphic novel ever. I kind of just don't have a lot to say about this one. I did enjoy my time reading it, but I don't really have much else to say outside of that. So those are all of the books that I read in November. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd love to discuss them with you in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!